You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
All right, welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health in cinema and television and how it is portrayed. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do you need to know about mental health? I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a screenwriter as well as a professor of screenwriting, and I'm joined as always by my brother, a general and forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Joshua Jones.
Great to be here, Jeff. Hey, it was just Mother's Day.
Yes,
when
it
we're
was
recording this. Jeff, what do you think? What do you think our mom would say about us having this podcast if she were alive today?
Well, she would say, "Oh, geez," which was her usual line. But then she would tell all of her friends that we had the #1 podcast. She would absolutely say that. She wouldn't want people to listen to it because we rib her so much, but she would 100% tell all of her friends that we had an award-winning best podcast, the #1 podcast.
We have the #3 podcast on my playlist. So
I actually think we have the #1 podcast in Kelso, Washington. I would not be shocked. There's a lot of people from our hometown that listen, and I'm so honored by that. Like, people are, signing up, checking it out. I just think it's really cool. So shout out to Kelso. Smelt capital of the world. Okay, we want you to start your week off right with our podcast. So we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch us on YouTube or Patreon. Please know that all the proceeds from Patreon are donated to 988 call centers. Josh, tell us a little bit about 988 call centers.
Yeah, so 988 is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number. It's a number that you or someone you know can call or text if you're suicidal or in a mental health crisis. That is 988. And as always, folks, the information expressed in this podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing expressed in this podcast is medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. And as always, spoilers galore. Of course, this is a 25-year-old movie that we are reviewing today, so if you haven't seen it by now, you really should.
Yeah, spoiler alert, Kevin Spacey is a bad guy. His character in the movie is the bad guy. Okay. Thank you, Josh. Today we're talking about Seven, a movie about two homicide detectives who try and track down the perpetrator of vicious and elaborate crimes based on the 7 deadly sins. This is not a Jones family documentary about the age I became taller than my much older brother, as the title Seven may suggest. Josh, before you begin your diagnosis, I also want to briefly mention this week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is a big one. We got Amazon, of all companies. So yeah, you may not know this. Don't give me that face. I can't.
No,
I can't do anything about our sponsors.
Yeah, no.
You may not know this, but when you return packages to Amazon, they don't restock the item. They used to just throw them away until now. Now, for only $50 a month, you can sign up for Amazon's surprise service, where you get someone's discarded package. Will you get a sweater that was too large? Maybe a coffee maker. You won't know until your package arrives, and you can answer the question,
what's in the box?
Check out Amazon.com for more details. All right, Josh, let's get into this. Enough horsing around here.
Actually, let's horse around just a little bit, because that is a fantastic idea for a way for Amazon to make a little bit of extra money. I mean, I
kind of agree.
That. Yeah, that would be awesome.
I would 100% put like $20.
Absolutely have a $20 or $50 a month surprise package.
And I actually think it is a thing that they don't restock. I think that they do oftentimes just discard the item. So Amazon freebie for you. Okay, so let's get into this. Movie. So Josh, this one is really about a serial killer, and we can really use this opportunity to really dive into serial killers. So tell me a little bit about John Doe. Tell me about Kevin Spacey's character. What's going on with this fantastic serial killer that we saw in Seven?
Yeah, 100% Hollywoodized. Just completely Hollywoodized. Not a diagnosis that I can put on this guy. He's the archetypal supernatural serial killer. I mean, he is so over the top with everything that he does, and he's able to do it perfectly. But interestingly enough, they didn't give me enough to say, I think he's got this diagnosis. Is he a psychopath? Yes, but that's really kind of an easy one. But then when you get into trying to characterizing what kind of serial killer is, he kind of spans all characteristics. So let me be a little bit more specific. When we talk about serial killers, the FBI they literally have written the books on serial killers, and serial killing is defined as the unlawful killing of two or more victims by the same offender in separate events. We think serial killers have always likely existed. Lots of folks have tried to type and characterize serial killers, and nobody's really come up with something that makes a lot of a lot of sense applied over and over again. So you can kind of split them into organized versus disorganized. That is an organized killer who is methodical, plots out what he or she's going to do. Most often he, and that's where the John Doe character would fit in. This was very organized, uber organized, as opposed to a disorganized killer where the impulse to kill kind of builds, and then they go out in like a frenzy and kill, and then have somewhat of a cooling off period.
Not to say that this would be equitable, but like I think of somebody like Dexter, where there's a propensity for, I killed someone, now it's like, I don't need to kill for a while, and then it builds and builds and builds, the impulse builds, and then they need to kill. Is that a pretty common thing that happens with real serial killers?
Yeah, that has been described over and over and over again, where there's this kill and then there's a cooling off period,
right?
And that's what typifies your classic serial killer, as opposed to a spree type serial killer where they do a whole bunch of serial killings but in a compressed time span. And you'll note I'm not saying the names of these serial killers. I debated this going into this week. I don't want to glorify these horrendous people who've taken the lives of people that lots of people that people loved, who were sisters and mothers and daughters.
Well, thank you for picking the much less interesting version for our podcast. I appreciate that. Let me ask you about because we've talked before about serial killers are people who lack empathy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
So
they're definitely sociopaths.
So, but a person who lacks empathy doesn't fully describe what I think you're talking about with serial killers who have this build up and release. There must be something. There must be in there that wants to kill, not just can kill because of a lack of empathy, but needs to do it. What's the difference there?
That's another way that we try to split up and characterize serial killers is based on their motive. So you've got your hedonistic or your lust, thrill, or comfort killer, who has a sexual component to it, or they are killing because they need a thrill and it wells up inside them. So that's one type. Then your power and control type, for who it's literally just about, okay, I can control this person. They're not even a person to me. But then you get into the third type, which I think more talks about John Doe, and that's the mission-oriented serial killer.
Okay.
And these are typically psychotic folks. So folks with schizophrenia or delusional disorder, or some perceptive problem where they truly believe they have a delusion, a fixed false belief that they have to kill for some reason. And the makers of Seven led us to believe that John Doe had at least part of a mission-oriented goal in mind and reason, whether quasi-religious, that he was having to do these murders. Although there was also a scene later when they're driving in the car with Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and Kevin Spacey, and they're interrogating him a little bit, where Brad Pitt brings up, "You must love to do this too," and Spacey's character says, "Well, just because God's commanding me to do it doesn't mean I also, it doesn't align with what I love to do." And that's one of the problems with trying to characterize and type these serial killers, is that it bleeds over into each other so much. And it's more of a way for us to try to understand what the heck's going on with these folks than probably a truly scientific breakdown between the types.
That's fair. In this movie, the vanity aspect was very important to him.
I'm setting the example. And what I've done is going to be puzzled over and studied and followed.
That's not actually all that common with serial killers. Like we can even name, and I'm not going to, but we can name the serial killers that were in the media because they would send letters to the media. And the number isn't very great with that. But there was a vanity aspect to this. What typology fits that vanity? Is that fixed false belief, or what's that component of it?
Yeah, that's that. See, again, that bleeds into the hedonistic, so the lust and the thrill, and power and control. Those bleed together in my mind. The folks who are taunting the media and the police with letters and messages and things like that, on the organized versus disorganized scheme, you would classify those as organized killers. And it's actually probably, it used to be more common, I think, probably in the 80s and 90s. We were pretty unsophisticated as a society and a culture in how we, dealt with serial killers. And so the media was all over the place on this stuff. And I think there's probably a lot more self-control from the media and the media working with the police to not give these folks fame and glory and more, more.
Is that speculation, or do you know that for sure?
That's speculation, but it sure feels that way, doesn't it?
I would say yes, except for the fact that the media glorifies school shootings. Every school shooting you see, there's a frickin' CNN breakdown of the school so that they can map out how the shooter went into the school. It's like they make a frickin' production out of it. I don't believe that if there was a serial killer that there wouldn't be just this rush to be first and to sensationalize. Because I think I see, and maybe I'm wrong here, maybe I'm just sensitive about it, but I see a lot of sensationalism when it comes to school shootings.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be more self-control around serial killers. And perhaps it's not on the media side. Perhaps it's actually on the law enforcement side, where they're just not,
that's fair.
Not talking about it and not having these massive press conferences and things like that. So, yeah. Hard to tell. I mean, I'm racking my brain to think of the last quote serial killer that was covered, and the one we're up here in the Seattle area, so we had a really, really famous one that went on for years and years and years up in Seattle.
The Green River Killer.
Yeah, and I can't think of one that was sensationalized quite like that in quite a long time. So
yeah, there was the sniper a few years ago, but God, that must have been a decade ago now.
I think longer than that.
Yeah, it might have been even longer than that. That's so interesting because, equating it back to school shooting, and I don't want to talk about this any longer than I have to. It feels to me like there's more school shootings because we've been covering them, and it just gives people ideas. And so I just wonder if there's a component of that with serial killers. One of the things that you and I talked about sort of in our pre-meeting was how, in your mind, and I do want you to talk about this, you don't think someone like John Doe could actually exist, because even though there's crossovers in the serial killers, there's too much crossover with John Doe. He couldn't be this and be this, and I'm really fascinated by that. But I'm also interested in if there's something to the more serial killers that we see, the more people have ideas, or the more people who are psychotic or have antisocial personality sort of get ideas about killing. Does that, help them be better serial killers?
Yeah, maybe. There's so much information available at your fingertips now than there was in the 1980s that, interestingly enough, the supposed or the proposed number of serial killers active in the United States right now is supposed to be less than it was a couple decades ago.
Oh, interesting.
But is it? Or
right.
Are they just better? I mean, nobody really knows.
Right.
Are they better at evading detection? No, nobody really knows. I was reviewing some literature earlier today, and one of the interesting things is that of the serial killers that were caught, their average intelligence is below average. It's about 94. Notice I said of the ones who got caught.
Right.
There are for sure serial killers that haven't been caught. I mean, it's a morbidly fascinating subject. One that it makes me super squeamish because you glorify these folks, and by definition you are disallowing or denigrating the memory of the folks they killed, things like that. I will say, I listen to quite a bit of podcasts, and I will say that one podcast that does a really good job, I think, of covering serial killers completely, but also valuing the victims is the Morbid podcast. So highly recommend that. They do those two gals do a really nice job of honoring the victims, while also talking about the heinousness of the crime. So if that's your ilk, highly recommend them.
Okay, so the other point of that, and talking about this, you didn't feel like John Doe it could exist. You said it, the very first thing, he's Hollywoodized, but what is it specifically about John Doe that you don't think could? There can't be a serial killer like John Doe. Talk to me about that.
He was too perfect and too flawed at the same time. I mean, he had this absolutely master plan that he plotted out over, more than a year. The victim of his sloth killing, he had kept paralyzed for a year, tending to him the whole time. It was just way too organized, even for an organized serial killer to have maintained that for so long. And then they peppered in a whole bunch of details about him that he wasn't that organized. All his journals with his, with his manic writing.
No dates. Placed on the shelves in no discernible order. Just his mind poured out on paper.
They wanted to have it all. They wanted to make him this super organized, almost a super villain of killing, but also look at how completely crazy he is. You can't have it. You can't have it always, in my opinion.
So up until they crash into his pad and they find the notebooks, are you okay with it?
Sure-ish. I mean, sure. Look, Seven is one of my favorite movies. It's a fabulous movie. But it is in broad generalizations, right? I mean, there's nothing specific enough for me to say this is a good example. These are all archetypes. They're actually, I think, mostly one-dimensional characters, and they're meant to be that way.
Right.
I mean, even the city itself is not named.
Yeah, it's a good, solid thriller, and it's meant to be a thriller. And I think, because you're right, this is one of my top 5 favorite films, and I watch it maybe once every 2 years. But this is the first time I've watched it, for this purpose. Yeah. And it really is interesting to see how the good guys are completely ineffective. They do absolutely nothing. They just get torched and tortured, by John Doe. John Doe bends them to his will throughout the entire movie. But I don't care. And I think part of that is we just have this expectation in film that the good guys are going to win. So it was just really nice to see a great villain. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why people loved Thanos so much. Thanos was a really good villain. Like he won in one of the movies, and it was like, what? We haven't seen this before. So it was just really nice to see. And Kevin Spacey, I'm not rooting for him to make a comeback in Hollywood. He's still an incredible actor. That performance was chilling. It's chilling. We just don't make movies like that often. And obviously David Fincher is, one of, if not my favorite director. Let's talk about Morgan Freeman. Let's move on to Morgan. Does he have a diagnosis? What's going on with the good old voice of God?
Yeah, Jeff, as you said, looking at this movie again with a critical eye of what we're doing was really interesting. So, although neither the Morgan Freeman character or the Brad Pitt character, I'm going to give a firm psychiatric diagnosis. Both of them are dealing with psychological issues throughout the movie that, although one-dimensional as they are really archetypal and play into each other really well as being two sides of the same coin. So
yeah, I think it's a little unfair, Josh, to say that Morgan Freeman was archetypal. He wasn't 2 weeks to retirement. He was 1 week to retirement, and that's a different thing. That's a different thing.
Was Danny Glover unavailable for that role?
No, he was too old for this shit.
Okay, so Morgan Freeman's character, Detective William Somerset in this movie, is suffering from a psychological condition called burnout, and I've been immersed in.
I bet no one knows what that is. I'm giving love to the audience who has probably experienced burnout and be like, fucking A right, man. I know that shit.
So the reason that I've been so immersed in the literature and culture of burnout over the last few years is really because of the pandemic, and in the medical profession, burnout has been a huge topic and continues to be a huge topic. But burnout is a psychological condition that comes from prolonged job stress. It's got three main aspects: overwhelming exhaustion, cynicism and detachment from your work, and feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. And if those are the three hallmarks of burnout, then Detective William Somerset has got it. He's got it. From the moment we see him, he's got burnout. He feels ineffectual. He's done because he can't make a difference. He did a really nice job. I mean, Morgan Freeman, can play anything. He could win an Oscar, playing a Coca-Cola bottle. I mean, he's just fabulous.
I would love to see that. Yeah, his line when he's talking to his boss.
His attacker stabs him in both eyes. This happened just last night, about 4 blocks from here.
Yeah, I read about it.
I don't understand this place any longer.
Damn, that was just a great piece of writing there, where it's like, I would be burned out. Yep. That would do it.
No.
That would do it for me.
No, you can see it. Well, I think it's a big deal in our society, especially as our society ages and jobs seem to get tougher, and there's less of a workforce that wants to do jobs that are painful. I mean, I'm thinking of medicine. I'm also thinking any first responders, cops, etc. And so we've got to figure out what to do about this, because we're also a much more educated society. We're not going to work ourselves into a grave if we don't have to. So how do we make these jobs how do we make these jobs for which burnout is endemic less prone to burnout? It's a challenging nut to crack.
Yeah, it's so funny. I remember, Mom and Dad were educators, which means that they had the summers off, because there was no school in session, and a lot of teachers have summers off, but there's still massive burnout when it comes to teaching, and you're still getting a fair amount of time off, but it's not enough. It's not enough to cope with the burnout. I can't even imagine the first responders. And I'm going to wade into some like tricky waters here because I want to talk about just cops for a second. We have a cop in the family. Our uncle is a cop. And I've done some ride-alongs with Jackson. And I think I've done like a total of 5. I always had a blast when I was on the ride-alongs with him. But we saw some like stuff that was pretty heavy for a teenager because I was in my teens at the time. And I just remember thinking, I was like, there's no way to do this job and not become cynical about the world. There's just no way to do it. And that is anecdotal evidence for sure. And I'm 100% not an expert in any of these fields. So this is just anecdotal evidence. This is just my opinion. But there's a guy that I follow named Jocko Willink. Do you know who that is? He's a SEAL. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So in the wake of all the very real issues that people were having with cops, following George Floyd, et cetera, he was talking about how it's not a matter of having fewer cops; it's a matter of getting them off the street more. And I thought that was really, that made a lot of sense. But he's like, you can't have these guys on the street 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 4 days a week, and then a day to process, and a day where they just come in and they process what happened in their week. And I was like, that sounds like a good place to start, for any first responder. Like, let's pay these guys to process what happened so that they can go out the next week and be better at it, be more empathetic, be, a better version of whatever they need to be. But we have to start somewhere, especially with first responders and with people who are responsible for other people's lives. We just have to do better.
Yeah. One of the concepts that we talk about in Burnout, at least in the medical profession, is the concept of moral distress or moral injury. And that's the idea that what you're seeing is and what you're experiencing is obviously very distressing. But what's more distressing than that is that you don't have the tools to actually make a difference to help the person or help the people involved. And so it compounds the stress because not only is it stressful, but you're also very ineffectual in being able to do what you are put out there to supposed to be able to help. And I can only imagine the first responders feel that way as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that they do, but then at the same time, like, they have each other, and I think a lot of like first responders, like there's a brotherhood, with cops, with firefighters, with EMTs. It's like they're at least trying to help each other. I mean, there is a really strong brotherhood and sisterhood, that develops, and it's like, these people are crying out for people to be empathetic towards them. And I just think we have to do a better job. And with everybody, it's not that you have to be a first responder to experience burnout. You can experience burnout in any job. There's a graphic designer named it's Stefan. I can't remember his last name, but he preaches every 6 years you take 1 year off, and you go and he says that's the year when he, thinks about what he wants to do for the next 6 years. But he moves some of his retirement years into his life so that he can enjoy his retirement years earlier. I just always thought that was a brilliant idea. I think it was Stefan Sagmeister. I'm going to look that up.
In my previous role, leading a group of physicians, that was one of the things that I proposed was that every 10 years you get 6 months sabbatical.
Oh, nice.
To kind of think what you're going to do. It was economically infeasible.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
At least the calculation that we did at the time.
Sure.
I'm going to bet that as we go on in time and figure out, hey, we've got to do something, I think that those ideas will become more economically viable.
Sure.
Because they're going to have to be.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump to Brad. Good old Detective Mills. You said neither of these guys have a diagnosis, but psychologically there's some stuff to talk about.
Right, and no surprise for anybody who's seen the movie, Detective David Mills has got an anger control problem.
What'd you fucking say?
He's a hothead, and you know what? Been there in my past. So let's talk about anger a little bit. Get down to very basic. So anger is an emotion of antagonism towards someone or something you believe has wronged you. It can be external. You can feel it just internally. And it is both an emotion, but also a physiologic response. It raises your blood pressure. It increases your heart rate, increases your respiration rate. Anger can sometimes sharpen your focus, but more often it clouds your judgment if it gets out of control. And so I think everybody's probably heard of, you need to do anger management, or you need to have some anger management training. And anger management is a thing. It can be very effective. And actually, we all practice anger management all the time. Anger management training or anger management therapy involves learning techniques to understand and control your anger and its physical effects. I actually like to think of anger as a secondary emotion, especially when I'm treating males in our society.
Sure.
And I think what I mean by a secondary emotion is that it's masking a more complex feeling that may be socially stigmatized. Now, you and I were raised in the 80s and 90s. It was not really socially acceptable to have feelings such as sadness, jealousy, inadequacy.
Sure.
It was
Any sort of hurt.
It was acceptable to just be angry. Oh, be tough, fight it out, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it was much more acceptable to be angry than it was to have hurt feelings.
Absolutely. And so when I'm working, especially with male patients and oftentimes with females too, is okay, you're feeling very angry, but what's underneath that?
Right.
Do we need to build another emotional vocabulary to figure out why are you so angry? Are you embarrassed? Do you feel inadequate? What else is going on?
So anger is usually hiding the real emotion.
I think so. I mean, that's one way to conceptualize it. Yeah.
I remember when I was in junior high, I was playing one-on-one basketball with a kid, and I was scoring on him at will, and he was getting a little frustrated, and I was definitely being a dick about it. And he just hauled off and punched me. Hit me right in the face, and it didn't really do much because we were just like 11 or 12 or whatever. But I was so surprised by it that like my anger didn't kick in, and I just kind of looked at him and was like, why would you do that? That really hurt my feelings. And because I didn't get angry, and because I asked him, and it immediately diffused it, and he was angry, but then like when he saw that he like hurt my feelings, he was like, I'm sorry. And I was like, oh, okay. Do you want to keep playing? And we just went back to playing basketball. But had I jumped to anger, then it would have ended in a very different place. But I just think about, it wasn't normal to tell someone you were hurt by something. Right. So it was really disarming for this kid when I was like, hey, that hurt my feelings, not my face.
Yeah.
And I got a very quick apology. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that was something I personally learned very, very early in life, is that, having hurt feelings was not acceptable. Get mad instead. And part of wanting to be a jock, especially in the small town that we grew up in. Oh, totally. You couldn't have those feelings. I mean, I was completely ostracized by that. So get mad, get pissed, ball up your face and get out there and scrap. That was the way to do it. And those kind of lessons really impact somebody, and they can be pretty scarring.
There's all these, I see this on TikTok all the time, but like Gen Alpha and Gen Z are like coming at Gen Xers. And it's just hilarious to me because like, guys, you have no idea like how kind of like tough Gen Xers were. Like we were latchkey kids. We were like, kicked out in the morning and told to be home before supper. But the same sort of thing. Like nobody was there for our emotions. We were angry and dealt with things in a very different way. And it's like boomers were the worst generation. There's no doubt about it. I don't know what people's problem is with Gen X, but don't come for us because we are not emotionally stable.
Oh my God, we got to make a t-shirt. Gen X, don't come for us.
Don't come for us. Do not. Just
Back off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boomers, fine.
Understand that we're laughing through the tears.
Exactly. Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. I loved the choice, by the way, in the movie of, making the Morgan Freeman character suffering burnout and was very empathetic, and having Brad Pitt be, the young guy who's very angry and not as empathetic. It was just a really good juxtaposition that I thought worked really well. Yes, they were still, one note, as you sort of mentioned before, but it was like that was a great screenwriting choice. And you couldn't have cast this thing better. Like Freeman and Pitt were amazing in this.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could take those 3 actors or 4 actors throwing Gwyneth Paltrow and mix the roles around, and you just still have a great movie. It didn't matter who played what. It
would have been weird for Morgan Freeman to play Brad Pitt's wife.
I disagree. He would have crushed it. He would have absolutely killed it. I'm going to have a baby. I'm not sure why Sean Connery came out there.
No, that was a decent Morgan Freeman. I will give you props for there, dude. And that is not the worst Morgan Freeman I've ever heard.
It's definitely not the worst Morgan Freeman I've done. Getting back to Brad Pitt's character, though, there was one of the things that frustrated me about this movie is I get it, he's angry.
Right.
But why? Why?
Yeah.
Is it just because he's young and brash? I mean, he didn't even really sound like he had a lot to prove because he wanted this assignment for some reason, and why that was so mysterious, why he wanted the assignment, they never really explained.
Right.
And so, why was he so angry? Why? What was behind it? What was the primary emotion behind the secondary emotion? That was frustrating for me.
Yeah, and what was really frustrating about exactly what you're saying is it was important to the ending to understand why he was so angry, because he, embodied wrath. So it would have been nice to spend a little bit more time to dig into why this is such an angry character, because I didn't really think of him as that angry of a character until someone, killed his wife and his unborn kid. And I think that would make anybody angry. I don't know that you need to find the secondary emotion or the primary emotion for that one. I think that that's pretty anger-inducing. So it fell a little flat for me that he is wrath, when he wasn't all that angry throughout the movie. So let me ask you this question, though, because it goes hand in hand with it. I think we both agree that we didn't necessarily see that much anger. Does he misstep as a cop if it's not for John Doe? Is his anger going to be an issue at some other point in his career?
Man, hard to tell. I mean, maybe. And he was he flew off the handle a little bit here and there, but hard to tell, right? I really don't know.
Because you got to think that anger mixed with burnout is a pretty dangerous combination.
Absolutely. But Mills wasn't burnout.
No, I know, but I'm saying that given a couple years, when he starts to feel the burnout, is he going to become problematic?
Well, again, it's hard to tell. I mean, without knowing what is behind his anger, was his anger due to too much passion for the job? Was it due to feelings of inadequacy? Was it due to things that burnout would prey upon? So, burnout is overwhelming exhaustion. Would he be too tired to be that pissed off? Cynicism and detachment from work. Is he not going to care as much? So it's really hard to say. I don't have a good answer for that. It could go either way. But let me ask you this question as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So the ending of the movie, he obviously kills John Doe because his wife's head was in the box. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Does he need to be shown to be this hothead and this angry guy to have the ending still work?
No, because the ending worked. I don't think that there's a single person who was uninspired by the ending of 7. I think that
Wait, did you just panic attack me? Did you just say the ending worked because the ending worked?
No, I'm saying that we didn't need anything additional because it was effective. Now, could it have been better? Yes, but it was also just effective. And sure, panic attack joke, well warranted there. But sometimes when something's funny, it's just funny. You know, like you don't need to work on it. When something is making people cry, you're done. You don't need to necessarily go like a level deeper. There are some real obvious flaws, you know, to this movie. You know, number one being, what was John Doe's original plan? If he hadn't been found by these two cops, you know, who were the original two wrath and jealousy victims gonna be before they randomly showed up at his door? That's never really answered. That's never really discussed. There's no way he knew who Brad Pitt was. He had just moved to town, so he would not have known who Detective Mills was. So he was not part of his 1-year plan. Because they even do the thing where it's like, oh, we're here, you know, exactly 1 year to the day that he wanted us here. Well, Detective Mills, this is his first week on the job, so there was no way for him to have like planned for Wrath to all of a sudden, you know, be part of this world. So there was a lot of things that don't add up, but we just don't care because it was such a good ending. It was such a surprise, twisty ending, right? That was, you know, shot brilliantly. But now, if you want to make a movie like this, now you have to do better. And I think about movies like The Batman, which is basically just 7-2 or 8. Sorry, that was a dumb joke.
That was a great joke. I loved that one.
Okay. But in the Matt Reeves, I think it was Matt Reeves, the director, in his, you know, the Batman's entirely ineffectual. He just solves the Riddler's riddles. That's all he does through the whole movie. And the Riddler, you know, gets away with what he wants to get away with. And it's essentially just another version of Seven. And it was a lot less interesting. And I don't think that movie is going to be as lauded as Seven was, because they didn't do a lot to improve on the type, you know, on the genre. And you have to. That's what you have to do. Like, somebody did Seven, so now you have to do a better version of Seven if you want to cut through.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed that when we're looking back at these movies, these groundbreaking movies, you know, with Seven and when we did Silence of the Lambs earlier, is that now 25 years later, you look back at some of the things they did in Seven and go, okay, well, there's a hole there, and okay, I've seen that done better.
Right.
But that's because many of the movies since then have been copycats of these genre-breaking or genre-producing movies.
Yeah, and especially Seven. I mean, Seven was really groundbreaking when it came out. And look, I was in my teens when I saw it. There was probably another version of Seven before Seven that I don't know about.
6.
Thank you. You know, it's like when you ask people like who sang, you know, All Along the Watchtower. And people are like, oh, it was, you know, Guns N' Roses. Like, no, it wasn't. It was Jimi Hendrix. No, it wasn't. It was Bob Dylan. You know, people forget that, no, this goes way back and way back. So there was probably a Seven before David Fincher made it. I don't know what it was. This one changed my life as a filmmaker. This was one of the movies that made me want to get into film. And there's been a lot of derivatives of this made since then. By Fincher himself, too. I mean, Zodiac was a little bit derivative of Seven. But, you know, if you got some good ingredients, if you got a good pasta dish, keep making it.
Yeah, Zodiac was a good movie.
Okay, so I know we talked about this a little bit already, but there was something interesting you mentioned in kind of our pre-meeting about the moment when they find the books, and how this serial killer was just an amalgamation of so many serial killers. Talk to me a little bit more about that, because I found that really fascinating.
Well, you know, as we talked about the types of these serial killers, he was mission oriented, but he was also hedonistic. You know, so much of this was lust and thrill, and obviously over the top, and then also power and control. I mean, there was a little bit here of everything, and I think that's what makes it now, looking back at it, dissatisfying from a psychiatric perspective.
Right.
Is that he's just serial killer. He is serial killer.
He's all of them wrapped up into one.
Yeah, he's all of them wrapped up. He's all of them and none of them at the same time. And that's fine for what this movie is, because, as I'm thinking about it now, that's what Fincher did, is that every character in this movie, including the city itself, doesn't have to have anything other than the one thing they are.
Right.
He's serial killer. Freeman's burnt out. Pitt's angry.
Yeah, the city, it's always raining, which I think is just an interesting detail. It's always raining, which, obviously adds to the mood, but it also adds to kind of the one-dimensionality. Which when you're writing something that is very plot-heavy and not story-heavy, it's okay to be more one-dimensional because how you move from place to place, how you move from moment to moment is the thing we're interested in. That's the more interesting thing. It's not necessarily how we're feeling. It's what is this next kill? What are the details of it? We have some images. The wife's eyes are circled. Let's go to the wife. The wife says this picture's upside down. We go to the picture. We move it around. We now find fingerprints. The plotting is so good that the story and the dimensionality, kind of comes second. You'll see that a lot in Indiana Jones. Is a pretty good example of just stories that are more plot than story, more plot than character. It's obviously satisfying when all three connect, character, story, and plot. But it's still highly effective and still makes for a movie that I want to watch, 30 years later.
No, yeah. So if we're talking about it, I think that's why I can't get any. I think that's why I wasn't able to give you any firm diagnoses on any of these characters. Is that they're broad brushstrokes. There's not enough detail in any of them to say so and so's got X condition, and I think for a movie like this, which is really, it's really a parable. As I think about it, it's so, because everything is with such broad brushstrokes, and it just works.
Yeah, look, it all comes down, as it always does. It all comes down to theme, and the theme of this movie being, the very last line.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
So he's a guy that's burned out. He can't do this anymore. He doesn't want to fight. And going through this process where he meets the literal devil. And I say literal because this guy he's the supervillain of serial killers. He's not a real entity. He's the devil. And in facing that, it gives him the strength, to move forward and try and be the change. And so it fits. It helps to fit very well into that theme. This really being Morgan Freeman's story. So let me ask you a quick question, because something you said earlier I thought was very interesting about serial killers being able to get off for being crazy.
Not guilty by reason of insanity. Yeah. Not
guilty by reason of insanity. So I don't know his character name, but Toby. From The West Wing is is John Doe's lawyer, and there's a scene where he says,
"If you do not accept, he will plead insanity across the board."
Let him try it.
Come on now, Martin. We all know with the extreme nature of these crimes, I could get him off with such a plea.
Did you feel like that in your experience? Would that have been true?
He would have had a good shot at it. I think in reality, well, first of all, most jurisdictions don't consider antisocial personality disorder as an exculpatory condition.
Oh, good. Okay, interesting.
An NGRA defense on, but this guy was super psychotic.
Why is that? Why don't they consider that? Is it because it's not solvable? It's not something that can be cured.
Yeah, probably that. Probably also because, honestly, bluntly, if you were going to excuse people for having antisocial personality disorder, you'd be excusing about 50 to 60% of the people in prison. So it's, when forensic psychiatry, which is the application of psychiatric principles to answer legal questions, is a really interesting field to me, because you're trying to apply science, or at least what we know about the science of the brain and the mind, to legal, which are always then political questions.
Right.
And there's things you can do, and there's some things you can't do. So, letting folks off for that wouldn't be something. Now, also, folks who have antisocial personality disorder, they can decide not to do something. They can decide not to commit crime. They can do that.
Right.
Someone who's really pushed by a delusion that says you have to kill this person or, the world's going to end, that our society, our Western culture has decided makes you not culpable for your crime.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's like, he should be not guilty by reason of insanity. He's obviously crazy. It's like, yeah, shit-chung. Sure, but this one,
so that's another really interesting. That's another misconception, I think. When people think that people who get not guilty by reason of insanity pleas, they're getting off for their crime. No, they usually end up spending most of the rest of their life, if not the rest of their life, in a psychiatric hospital, in a maximum security psychiatric hospital.
I imagine those aren't fun.
They're okay. I mean, I worked in one for, it's not, you don't have your freedom, but you're also getting treatment for a really disabling condition. So
you got some good cable.
Yeah.
All right,
well,
there you go.
Streaming now, Jeff.
Sure. All right.
I do want to say one thing before we wrap up about burnout, because Jeff, you and I always want to try to give listeners something that they can have some action on, something to think about.
Yes, we do.
If you're feeling burnout by your job, you're overwhelmingly exhausted because of it, you're cynical, detached from your work, and feeling ineffective, talk to somebody about it. I mean, I know that we keep saying that over and over again, that's the answer, is to talk to somebody about it, but it really is the answer here. And most employers are taking a hard look at this and going, gosh, if we want an effective workforce, we really have to do something about burnout.
Right.
So find out what resources your employer has, find out what resources they have for like their EAP, which is a employee assistance program. Ask for help, because it is available, and it can be really helpful. All right, Jeff, what do we got coming up?
We had talked about doing Split, which I think would be super interesting, because obviously that's about multiple personalities, and it's also science fiction. So we get to talk a little bit about like the kind of the divide, or the split, dare I say, between real psychiatry and science fiction psychiatry, because you get to set new rules in the world when you do science fiction, and so they set new rules for psychiatry, in that movie, and so I think it'd be really interesting to talk about, psychiatry from a science fiction standpoint.
Well, I think that's a really good idea, Jeff, and then that actually leads into the third movie in the trilogy, Glass, which I actually haven't seen, but my understanding is it's actually set in a psychiatric facility. So let's do Split, and maybe we'll do Glass after that.
Yeah, we'll do Split. Glass is a hot pile of trash. It is not a good movie.
Well, let me give you this soundbite instead. Then, Jeff, I think Split would be a great movie. I love McAvoy. I'm really excited to see what they put together for that. So let's, guys, watch Split, and we'll dive into that in an upcoming episode.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks as always for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of Seven. If you like this video, please like and subscribe on YouTube, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. Leave us a comment at what movies you would like to see. We haven't yet taken anyone's suggestion, but we're collecting them. Somebody actually mentioned Raising Cain, and I thought that was a really good idea. So we might be doing Raising Cain. Yeah. So that's it for us. We're also on Patreon. For Josh Jones, I'm Jeff Jones, and we will see you next week.